everyone, my name is Bailee Dolan, and for this analysis, I chose President John F. Kennedy's 1963 State of the Union Address and President George W. Bush's 2006 State of the Union Address. Even though these speeches were delivered over 40 years apart, they both reflect the biggest concerns facing the United States during their presidencies. I'll compare the main issues each president focused on, how successful they were in addressing those issues, evaluate the effectiveness of each speech, and discuss how Congress and the opposing party responded. The first question that I will touch on is, what were the two key issues each president focused on? John F. Kennedy in 1963, his issue that President Kennedy spent the most time discussing was national security during the Cold War. Throughout the speech, he emphasized the importance of maintaining a strong military while continuing efforts towards peace with the Soviet Union. You could tell this topic mattered deeply to him because I noticed his tone became more serious whenever he discussed America's responsibility in protecting freedom around the world. Kennedy also focused heavily on strengthening the American economy. He argued that reducing taxes would encourage businesses to invest, create jobs, and stimulate economic growth. His message was that a strong economy was just as important to national security as military strength was. George W. Bush, in 2006, on the other hand, President Bush's biggest priority was national security and the war on terror after the September 11th attacks. He argued that defeating terrorism overseas was necessary to protect Americans at home. Compared to Kennedy, Bush's delivery was more direct and emotional whenever he discussed terrorism. The second issue that George W. Bush emphasized was reducing America's dependence on foreign oil. He introduced what he called America's addiction to oil and encouraged investments in alternative energy and new technologies to improve energy independence. Now, the next question is, how successful were they? I would say that Kennedy was fairly successful with his economic goals, although he was assassinated before his proposed tax cuts became the law. Congress later passed much of his tax plan in 1964. I learned that many economics believed that tax reductions helped to stimulate economic growth during the 1960s. Regarding the Cold War, Kennedy helped reduce tensions after the Cuban Missile Crisis by negotiating the Limited Nuclear Test Ban Treaty in 1963. While the Cold War continued for decades, his administration made important progress towards preventing nuclear conflict. Bush's record is more mixed. His administration successfully prevented another terrorist attack on the scale of September 11th while he was in office. But the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan became much longer and more controversial than originally expected. On energy, Bush helped increase research into renewable energy and encourage domestic energy production. However, the United States remained heavily dependent on oil during his presidency, so his long-term goal of energy independence was not achieved. Next question that I would like to touch on is, what grade would you give each of these speeches? I would give Kennedy's speech an A. He was confident, he was optimistic, he was very persuasive. His speech balanced realism with hope, and he explained complicated issues in a way that even I could understand. Even today, many of the topics that he discussed, like economic growth and national security, are all still very relevant. I would give Bush's speech a B. His speech was well organized and had passion, especially when he talked about national security. However, some of his policy proposals became controversial over time, for example, regarding the Iraq War. I also think his discussion about reducing dependence on foreign oil turned out to be one of the most important parts of his speech because energy independence is still discussed today. The next question: how did Congress and the opposing party react? During Kennedy's presidency, or during his speech, there appeared to be more moments of bipartisan cooperation, while Democrats and Republicans certainly disagreed on policy. Members of Congress generally showed respect throughout this address. Compared to modern State of the Union speeches, the atmosphere felt much less divided. Bush's speech reflected a much more politically polarized environment. Republicans frequently applauded his comments on national security and the war on terror, while Democrats were noticeably quieter during those sections. You could clearly see that the Iraq War had become a major point of political disagreement. Comparing the two speeches, I noticed that Bush's address has more visible partisan divisions than Kennedy's did. In conclusion, I overall found it interesting how both presidents focused on protecting the country, but the threats they faced were very different. Kennedy was primarily concerned with the Cold War and nuclear conflict, while Bush focused on terrorism after September 11th attacks. Even though the challenges changed, both speeches show how State of the Union addresses allow presidents to explain their priorities, persuade Congress, and communicate directly with the American people. Thank you for listening to me. Have a great day.